clipping a young horse that hasn't been clipped before, or a horse that's had an unpleasant clipping experience in the past, I give them some Omega Alpha Chill pretty much an hour before I start clipping. "60 cc's is a good dose. It's very important when you're clipping your horse that your horse is as clean as possible. It's hard during the winter months, but the cleaner that your horse is, the longer your clipper blades will last. My favorite grooming tool is a flexible curry mitt because it's really good at getting into all the difficult to get places, and horses that are sometimes sensitive don't mind it as much. So I start with water as hot as it can get in the kettle. The colder it is outdoors, the more quickly it cools down. But obviously you don't want to burn your horse, so it's important to check the temperature before you start and add cool water as necessary. The bigger bucket I fill with just cool water to be a rinse bucket. To the small bucket of hot water, I add just a splash of vinegar. And then I prefer to use quite a small towel because I find it easier to manage. You're going to put it in the water. You want the water to ideally be sort of as you then want to use the towel just like a curry comb, really close to the horse's skin. Then the important phase, you can see all the dirt that came off on the towel. It's really satisfying if you use a white towel. The important thing is that now you dunk the towel in your rinse bucket and get rid of all that dirt before returning to the hot water. So here I have the remainder of my extension cord coiled as neatly as possible. And when it comes to the connection between the extension cord and your clipper wires, it helps if you tie a knot before you join the two. Otherwise, I find that as you move around the horse, you constantly unplug yourself. I have two blades, a bigger blade and a smaller blade. So the smaller blade goes on first, and the flat edge goes against your clippers. This is pretty standard for most types of clippers. There's two little holes that match up with two little points on your clipper blades. Then the bigger piece goes against the smaller piece. There's typically writing on the outside. This one says Andis, and obviously the writing is going to be towards the outside. So then there's these two little screws to fasten the blades onto the clippers. My clippers come with this cool little tool, or you could just use oil your clippers to get the most out of their lifespan. These clippers have a little hole on the top, and there's also two holes on the bottom of the blades. It's best to oil them while they're running. So I'm going to turn them on and run the oil through the hole on the top until I like the sound of the motor. Here I have my smaller handheld clippers. Again, they happen to be Andis. What I really like is even though they're small enough for doing ears and legs and the face and that sort of thing, they also have a great battery and last long enough for me to body clip a horse sometimes if you're dealing with a horse that hasn't been clipped before, or a horse that is really sensitive, or again maybe had a bad clipping experience in the past. It can be really helpful to have small clippers in your arsenal that you can use. So I'm going to start on the horse's shoulder, and I want to go against the grain of the hair, keeping the blade as close to the horse's body as possible. The first clip we're going to do tonight is a trace clip. It's a great clip for a horse that is still spending a lot of time outdoors or is in moderate work where they need a little bit of a clip, but you don't want to take too much off. So a good tip for practicing your lines before you start is really good to draw in chalk, which is a little bit more reversible than the clippers, where you want to clip. So the trace clip is going to start with a nice smooth line from your ear. It's hard to see the yellow on a gray horse. It's going to run down just above the point of shoulder. And end just before the horse transitions into the hindquarters. So we talked about starting at the shoulder because it's a nice neutral area for the horse. I tend to do the leg lines next because it's a little bit like coloring in the lines. I like to have my boundaries very clear so I don't get carried away. So your leg line is going to follow this muscle of your horse's forearm, and you want a nice V on the front of the leg. Believe it or not, the easiest way to keep your lines straight is to do them in as long a line as possible. When you get into short strokes, it's really difficult to keep them all the same. So it's best to be brave and go for as long a stroke as possible. So I'm going to try to do this neckline in one smooth piece. One area that I often find difficult is anywhere where there's wrinkles, and the front of their chest and into this elbow area is often a tricky place. When I get to somewhere where the hair changes, you have to change up the direction your clippers are going on these whirls. Sometimes you have to go up and down, side to side. When you get to a wrinkly area, the best thing to do is just pull the skin tight so that you can get the hair that was in the wrinkle. So for the belly line, again, I'm going to start with it a little bit lower than I want so that I have room for it to move up as I correct it without going all wrong. So here the hair grows up and down, so I have to go against the direction of the hair. And then as you get closer, see how these short strokes are really hard to keep straight? But then as you get closer to the front of the horse, the hair changes direction, and you can switch to using the clippers more side to side. Again, a long, smooth stroke is a lot easier to keep straight. So it's important as you clip in the elbow, we talked about picking up the horse's leg, but also see if you can get the horse to stand in different positions so that you make sure you have all the hair out of the way, no matter what position their leg is in as they move and jump. To get into the difficult to reach area around their elbow, it's often easier if you pick their front leg up. It's a good time you can also check if your front leg line is in the right place. You want it to just end at the point of their elbow when their leg is in flexion. So for the blanket clip, you're going to move your line a little bit higher than you would for the trace clip. And again, you're going to start moving up and down when you're close to this direction where the hair changes. And again, when I first start, I'm going to leave the line a little bit lower than I want it in the end. Once the hair starts to change direction, so I find it easiest if you do the front line and the back line first and then do your pinwheel last. Anytime you're working near the horse's hindquarters, it's really important to tie their tail up because it is incredibly easy to take a bit of their tail off. Ask me how I know. When you're measuring for the horse's back leg, a good rule of thumb is a hand spread up from the horse's hock is where you're going to start the V on their back legs. And then very similar to what we did on the front legs, you want a straight line, as straight a line as possible from that point indicated by your hand to just where their gaskin joins their body. It's a good idea to keep one hand on the horse's tail, not only as we talked about for making sure that you don't cut some of it off, but it's also a good motion restriction so that you don't get kicked. Pay attention to how your horse is standing when you're doing their hind leg line because it affects how the line looks. So we'll have Annika stand up square with her leg a little bit more underneath her body. There we go, good girl. And then just as with our earlier lines, I'm going to start with a line a little bit higher than I want in the end so that when I inevitably lose some when I correct straightness, that's alright. I actually like to do this back line first because it's really tricky to make the front line and the back line join up when you do the pinwheel. So to begin with, I'm going to, because the hair is going up and down at the very back for hindquarters, I'm going to use the clipper blades in an up and down motion before here you can see where the hair starts to change, and then I'll use the clippers sideways. To finish off a blanket clip or a trace clip, you do just remove a little strip of hair that the tail covers when the tail is nice and loose. So you're just going to take a little bit of hair off the inside of the horse's hindquarters. The pinwheel is the part of the blanket clip or trace clip that I find to be the very hardest. I'm going to start by staying as close to where the hair changes direction as possible because, like with your leg lines, but I find it even more so, I find that your pinwheel can get bigger and bigger and bigger as you try and make it symmetrical. So I try and start with a really small pinwheel and then just move it out as I need to get it symmetrical. The front of a blanket clip is super easy. You're just going to draw as straight a line as possible, pretty much from where your saddle pad would go. So you don't want a hair showing in front of your saddle pad. Then to finish it, you're going to round this off. So you don't have anything that hangs out below your saddle pad, and you don't want anything too angular. The hunter clip leaves the horse's legs furry as well as a saddle pad. When you're deciding how big to make your saddle pad, it's important obviously that it fits your own saddle. Depending on how big your saddle is, whether you mostly ride in a dressage saddle or a jumping saddle, it's really important to make sure that your saddle pad is the right size so that there isn't anything sticking out the back. So here I just put the saddle on the horse and eyeball or use my chalk to figure out where my saddle pad is going to end. Same as with all my other lines, I'm going to start making the shape, the swoop of the saddle pad quite early on, so I get a couple chances to practice the shape before I get too high up the horse's side. And then for the back of the saddle pad, I'm going to first do sort of a diagonal straight line, and then I'll round the corner. About marking out your saddle pad. When I originally started, I put the saddle on to figure out how far back I need to go, and then for the other side, so that I don't have to repeat that whole process, I usually just make a little mark. I shave a little bit over onto the other side, so I don't have to put the saddle back on any of the clips, like the hunter clip or full clip. Instead of taking all the hair off on top of the horse's tail, you leave a little triangle over the top of the horse's tail, and this is something that I do both sides of. Even though I haven't clipped the other side of her yet, I'll do the full triangle because otherwise I find it difficult to match them up.